Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another edition of It's All Good with me, Lucas, and Dr. Eric Lane. So today we're talking about people, how we treat people, how to change how we treat people. I was thinking about this when I was a kid. I watched two shows when I was a kid back to back. First, Sesame Street came on, and then Mr. Rogers. And as a kid, you don't really pick up on things. You just want to be entertained and learn. Well, Eric recently went to go see the movie Mr. Rogers from Tom Hanks, and I think it changed him a little bit. Good morning, Eric. How are you?
Hey, good morning. Doing good. Sounds like it's cold there.
Oh, yeah, it's cold everywhere, pretty sure.
Except in
Except for
Tucson.
probably
We're nice
in
and
Arizona.
warm out here. It's nice and warm in Tucson, so.
Good. Well, I know we're going to talk about some warm things today on the podcast. So you actually told me that you went to go see the movie Mr. Rogers, and when I saw the previews come out of the movies, I was like, I'm not going to go see that, because I remember as a kid, I thought, wow, this is kind of boring. But you said there's a lot of lessons to learn in this, huh?
Yeah, I was really impressed. We see a movie once or twice a week, and so we'll see movies that sometimes we're not convinced are going to be that great. And I wasn't sure. I saw the reviews were pretty high, so we went and saw it, and I was very impressed. I had seen the documentary of Fred Rogers, and I was very impressed with that. But this took a little bit different angle into the life of Mr. Rogers through the eyes of a journalist, and it's based on a true story. I know Hollywood takes a lot of liberties, but I think the meat of the movie is fairly accurate, and it just made me think a lot about one person's actions and the way that Fred Rogers handled himself, how it really did transform many generations. I was during the documentary, if you've ever seen that, he was the reason I think that public television continued to go forward, because the government was getting ready to basically shut it down. He was the last guy to testify. And after they heard him, they went ahead and granted, I think, the $1 million to continue to fund public television. I think that was back in the 70s. But it was just really refreshing to watch a movie where, Fred Rogers' mission was, he used to always say that the greatest evil is people trying to make you feel less than you are. And I think that if just that mindset, we look at the way we handle people every day, if we just eliminated making people feel less than they are, even if it's in a discussion when they don't hear us, if it's just in our thoughts, if we just constantly tried to build people up and try to really see their potential. And, you had those goofy songs that Eddie Murphy and others made fun of, but one of his theme songs was "I Love You Just the Way You Are." And I think conditionally we tend to love people. And Fred Rogers, he didn't seem to have conditions on the way he loved people no matter who they were, because he could always see the best version of that person.
The funny thing is, so you saw the documentary before you saw the movie or after?
I actually saw it before, and then the next morning when I worked out, I watched it again, because I just think I missed some of the parts of the documentary that were vital. So I've seen it twice.
So, like I said, as a kid watching Mr. Rogers, you think of him being very positive and then very methodical. And but there was never there was nothing bad on the show. There was no negativity. It was all positive things that he interacted with other things. And I know it's a TV show, but you're talking about his real life story and some of the things that you were telling me about how he treated people. Like he went to be interviewed by a TV or newspaper interviewer, and Mr. Rogers started interviewing him and asking him about himself, and found out that he had some issues with his family and his dad, and was trying to be, and was being supportive and stuff. And so I think that may be a point that we think about when we talk about how we treat people and how we change how we treat people. And so when you watch the movie and Mr. Rogers, is it called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood?
I think it's A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. It's one of those two. I can't recall the actual title.
And Tom Hanks plays him. What do you think Tom Hanks, after, studying him, and you think that could have changed Tom Hanks? Has he been interviewed since he's done that movie?
I can't imagine it didn't change. I think for the most part, we've seen Tom Hanks never have a lot of negative publicity, but I can't imagine playing the part of a guy like Fred Rogers, because Fred Rogers we look at trying to be real, genuine, and authentic. So most of us, I think, live sort of two lives. We have a life that sometimes we can turn on when we're in public, sometimes our jobs, and then we may revert to a lesser version of ourselves. I had a friend years ago that I told him, I said, I think at times maybe I'm hypocritical because I show up at work with this best version of me, and I'm happy and I'm loving and I'm kind. And sometimes I come home and I don't act that same way when the spotlight's not on us. And he told me, he said, the real you is the one that shows up, genuine, kind, loving. That's not the you that goes home and acts a little bit different. We need to learn how to become consistent. And Fred Rogers, he was asked in the movie by the journalist, well, how does Fred Rogers interact compared to Mr. Rogers? And Mr. Rogers was confused. He looked at him like, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, you act a little different when you're on the show. And he goes, no, I don't. And I think a testament to him is everybody that was interviewed ever said this guy was consistent. He never changed from being at home or on the television show. And if we could become that way and just become who we are all the time, but I'm not real sure a lot of people like who they are, and they need to learn how to choose themselves first and find those negatives and positives, but realize that best version of ourselves that we think sometimes is hypocritical is really our true potential and our true self.
Yeah. So after talking to you about this movie, and as we started out this podcast, it's about how do we change how we treat people. And I've been met a lot of people, and sometimes I've had some friends to where they ask you how you're doing, and as you tell them how you're doing, then they cut you off and they start talking about themselves. And I know it's hard not to be selfish, because I know that, you're into yourself and you also have things. But I think for me, the thing I'm going to start this year is really listening to people of what they're saying and try to find out what they need, and also look for something positive to say to them instead of looking at the negative, like you said. And I think when we do that, we have to be genuine about it. So you can't just, if somebody has, their hair is all jacked up, you can't say, oh, your hair looks great today. It's got to be something that's genuine. And so you actually have to learn how to study people and learn how to listen to people and then learn how to react to people. And I think those three things, if we can learn how to do that, and and not put ourselves first in certain situations and put other people's first, then that will start transforming into more like who Fred Rogers is and what he was about.
Yeah, and I think it goes even further than that. I know for me, it's really reflecting as you go through a day like today and think of what your thought is as you're walking down the street, or as you're interacting, for me today, at church, or if you're with somebody, or if you even see a TV commercial. If we start to really diagnose the thought processes that we tend to have an instant thought process when we see somebody or we hear somebody. And, from on TV, it could be too fat, too skinny, too this, too that. And I think it all begins with what our thoughts are, and start to try to. And it's a tough deal because mental work is way harder than physical. We can show up and act nice and kind, but what are the thought processes that we're having that nobody's hearing? And if we can start to get in a habit of looking at a person that we may have thought a negative thought about, or even a judgmental thought about that may not be ultra negative, and try to find just something positive and, and delete that and say, no, this person, they're a great dress, or they have, a great smile, or boy, they look passionate about what they are. Even if we may not agree with their ideals all the time, that's where I get into trouble as I watch myself, my thoughts. I think about some of the things that I do, and it's really easy. I grew up in the Seinfeld era, and I love Seinfeld. It's to me, it's one of the funniest shows, but the entire concept of Seinfeld is picking and making fun. The entire 10 or 12 seasons that they went through, and they sort of make fun of themselves, but we can easily get in that type of a dialogue where we become almost negative in a sense, and we laugh about it, but it becomes our behavior, and then it's hard sometimes to see the good in another person or their potential.
So it has to start with almost like you having a war in your brain. If you've been trained to, think that way for so many years and let your thoughts, take over, that you'll have to, at some point, you're going to have a battle in your brain about some of the negative things that you would say about somebody, and actually stop yourself and then think about something positive about that thing, and then actually saying that thing. Because I think sometimes, at least for me, excuse me, it's hard sometimes to take a compliment, and but it's much easier for me to give a compliment than it is to take a compliment. So maybe there's something there too about how do you take a compliment? Because I don't think I'm very good at taking compliments.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult thing for all of us. And I think the practice for most of us is sometimes we say a compliment that's way above and beyond because we're showing up a little bit more than we are. And so we're really trying to throw the fluff on somebody. Instead of, honestly, if you're going to give somebody a compliment, make it something that you feel genuine about. So, there's times we tell people things that we really don't believe, and it may be a positive thing, but we're trying to build them up instead of just something really honest and genuine. I think about politicians today and how people sit on one end of the spectrum. You're either on the right or the left. And somebody on the right cannot at all see one positive thing in somebody on the left, and vice versa, which is ridiculous. If you can't stand Nancy Pelosi, I can promise you there's some good qualities Nancy Pelosi has. She may be a good mother. If you can't stand Donald Trump, somebody on the left will say there's nothing, which is ridiculous. Everybody in this world has positive. And if we can just get in the habit of saying, I admire this about him, I admire this about her, and be genuine and authentic. And then when we interact with people, be honest about the compliments you're going to give them. Because I think you're right. I think a lot of times the compliments that we get, they're great. But sometimes we even know that maybe somebody's trying to fluff us up a little bit, and it may not be as genuine. But if we're more genuine with the compliments we give people, we can also be more genuine when we want to help somebody. And I don't say critique, but when we look them in the eyes and really do want to understand how they're feeling. I just think we're so used to the comments that we give and get being a little bit of too much or too little.
Yeah. I think I lost you. Are you there?
I'm back.
Okay. I think I lost you for a second. So your review of the movie. So I can't believe we're doing a podcast about the review of Mr. Rogers, but like when you go into, who he is and what he's about, it's crazy that we can learn about how to treat people through this documentary and through this movie. So I'm kind of excited to go see it now, where before I wasn't going to go see it, but I'm interested to find out how, watching that will help me change the way I address people and how I think of people and how I treat people. Is there anything else in the movie that surprised you?
I think they were very upfront about a lot of topics that people have discussed about Fred Rogers. I mean, there was quite a few rumors. I mean, Fred Rogers did not act like the, quote, manly man that I think people assume.
No.
There were a lot of rumors that Fred Rogers was gay, and they addressed those in there that, no, he had 2 boys, he wasn't. And it's just that concept. If you act a certain way, if you're kind, if you're loving, if you look in people's eyes. There was also, they talked a lot about race. I mean, Fred Rogers was in the midst of quite a bit of racism, and how he would invite specific people onto the show. One of the gentlemen that he was on the show often was a man that during this race era, he would sort of put their feet in this bath, this little children's tub together as though they were swimming, because at the time there was quite a bit of racial animosity to where white and black people couldn't swim together, and they were throwing chemicals. And it's just interesting how he would attack these things straight on, and he was one of the people that could do that. He would have a week on death. I mean, you talk to kids about death. He had a week on divorce, because a lot of times we just go away from those. But these are things these children, they don't completely understand. And to have somebody, talk with them about these topics that they're going to have in their lives. I mean, if you live, you're going to see death. If you live, you're going to probably see many of these bad things as well as the good things. And I thought it was just interesting. I didn't realize it as a child, because I had a pretty good childhood. I didn't have a lot of the times he would talk about some of the negative events. I didn't really see those. But there are so many children out there that are afraid and don't understand. And when they finally, somebody steps to their level and asks them questions or addresses the scariest things in their lives, it changed millions of people's lives. So it's just amazing. And then to see the guy live the way that he preached every day, it's just quite amazing.
Well, so I'm glad that you went to go see the movie, because now, like I said, now I'm going to go see it. I'm glad we can learn something from Mr. Rogers and from just different people in general in life. And my last thought I would say for this podcast is, if we're going to changing how we treat people, then we got to start changing our mindset. And like you said, that's a very difficult thing to do. But that's a challenge for this week. That anytime you get a negative thought of somebody like passing by in the street or something like that, the thing is to have that war in your brain to delete that negative and look for something positive. And I know that's a hard challenge to do, but I think the more that we can do that, the better off we'll be and happier we'll be, and we'll make other people happy as well, just like Mr. Rogers did. So any last words of encouragement, Eric?
Well, we've got the new year, and you know how you and I are with New Year. I think the new year is great. I think resolutions are... I don't think we should necessarily have resolutions. A new year should just translate and continued improvement. But I definitely think that a new year, for some reason, psychologically gives people an opportunity to change the direction of their lives. And one of the greatest things that I'm not a guy that likes quiet very much. And, I read a book, Stillness is the Key by Ryan Holiday a while back. And Ryan Holiday's a stoic philosopher. But I do think that in the mornings particularly, and evenings and afternoons if you can, but particularly in the mornings, if you can take time and have a 10 or 15 minute period of silence, and sometimes it may be driving to work. And one thing that really will help in this area is to sort of visualize your day before it happens. And if you're going to work, just sort of see yourself going there and start to see these interactions of positivity of who you might interact with. It's crazy that if you decide what you want your day to become like and sort of create it, even if it's just visually, if it's taking a shower, if it's sitting in a chair, driving to work, I think the power and the ability is you'll see that the day will become much more like you've designed it, as opposed to maybe some of the bad habits that we all fall into. But like you said earlier, it takes tremendous amounts of effort, mental effort, if we want to start to change these habits. And I genuinely believe, like Fred Rogers, that most people, well, I think all people are born into this world that are incredible human beings, and they have a lot of interactions that shape them. And sometimes the decisions they make we may not approve of, but it's based on the information that they have, and we don't know their circumstances. We don't know why they're doing what they're doing, but there's so much good in so many people. And if we start to make a consistent effort in the morning to at least shape our own lives and how we're going to act today, we can't control others. I think within a period of a few days and a few weeks, we'll start to see our days at a much higher level, but we'll start to really feel that type of love for other people that sometimes we just think everybody's not great. So that would be my suggestion. I know in my own life, it's been very powerful to sort of envision your day before you get up and watch yourself carry out some of these activities, like you said, how you're going to approach the person you work with, and be very genuine. Be careful with how quickly you say things, even if they're good, because don't try to overfabricate those. People know that. People know when you're telling them something that's not accurate. Just can be a simple thing. And I think that just a little few things like this, people do this in their marriages and their family. They'll notice some huge changes, and they'll genuinely love people a lot more. And it's like anything, when you send it out, it'll come back, and your lives will be markedly happier than they've ever been.
Love it. Well, thanks for that advice. That's the challenge this week, to make these changes. And then we'll talk to you again next week. Have a great week, and we'll hopefully get to see some positive changes in our lives. That is it. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.